Metaphor ReFantazio was easily my most anticipated game of 2024. Originally announced under the working title of Project ReFantazio in 2016, Metaphor would go on to be the first full game developed by Atlus' latest internal development team, Studio Zero, a studio headed by Katsuro Hashino, a heavy hitter at Atlus who directed Persona 3, 4, and 5, and Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne. Plus, it was chock full of other veterans from across both series. Studio Zero is basically a supergroup of Atlus devs, so fans were excited to see just what kind of game they would cook up. Smash cut to last year, and we get the first official look at said game, Metaphor ReFantazio, a fantasy epic that would seemingly be unconnected to anything the publisher had done before. It looked to be a refreshingly fresh idea, and I could not wait to play it. What excited me the most about Metaphor straight from the get was the fact that it would be an Atlus take on a more traditional fantasy setting rather than the more contemporary ones they were known for. I love Persona and SMT, but the idea of the people behind those games taking on something new and different was really interesting to me. I wanted to see what that would look like, and now I can say I have. And that's what this video is about, believe it or not. Welcome to my review of Metaphor ReFantazio, the next big title from Atlus and the debut of Studio Zero. Catherine Full Body doesn't count. Let's just get on with it, starting with the combat. Something I found interesting about this game since I played the demo is the fact that it uses the press turn battle system from SMT rather than the one more system from Persona. Out of all the carryovers from Persona, of which there are many, I'm honestly glad that wasn't one of them. As I've played more and more Atlus games over the years, I've really come to appreciate just how good press turn is. Quick explanation for those who don't know, press turn is Atlus's own unique spin on turn-based battles, where each side of the battle is given a certain amount of actions they can perform during their turn based on how many party members they have. You gain more actions by striking an enemy's weakness, and conversely, you can lose actions or even have your entire turn skipped if your attacks are dodged or blocked. Both sides of the battle operate under the same conditions, so just as you can exploit their weaknesses to gain the advantage, your enemies can as well. In the SMT games, press turn also ties in fantastically with the demon/persona fusion mechanic, and when paired together, they create what I find to be some of the most rewarding and satisfying turn-based gameplay out there. So naturally, one of my biggest questions going into this game was how well the new archetypes would meld with the signature Atlus combat loop. On the surface, archetypes have a lot in common with personas, especially from a story perspective, but how they function gameplay-wise does have some significant differences. First of all, they aren't restricted to specific characters. Any of your teammates can use any archetype, and you can also have multiple of the same archetype equipped at the same time. Each character has their own archetype skill tree thingy where you can not only unlock the various archetypes, but also allow them to inherit the skills of other unlocked archetypes. I'll admit, I was a little skeptical about them at first, but it turns out they actually allow for an impressive amount of party customization. It actually reminds me a lot of Digital Devil Saga and the mantras from that game, which will always be a good thing. I wouldn't say they are better or worse than Personas or Demons because I think both manage to accomplish different things. I guess you could say archetypes are a bit more straightforward. Instead of mixing and matching from over 100 personas, you're cultivating only 26 archetypes. Seems like a downgrade at first, but there is much more freedom in how you can utilize them within your whole team. In Persona, or at least the most recent three, only the protagonist is able to switch between personas. Everyone else is restricted to one persona with a predetermined moveset. The fact that each character has their own set of archetypes mean there is more to consider and manage when building your party. They definitely aren't as shallow as I was worried they'd be. I ended up really appreciating the nice bit of change up to the gameplay loop that archetypes offer. Something else I definitely appreciated about this game was how well it eliminated the need to grind, a key aspect of which is the new overworld combat. With the turn-based squad battles, there is real-time action combat used whilst exploring dungeons. It functions a lot like ambushing enemies in Persona 5, where it gives you an advantage going into the fight. You just need to whack them with your sword enough times to stun them, which allows you to make the first move no matter what, and even deals a decent amount of damage to them right at the start. Alternatively, if you get whacked before you successfully whack them, then the advantage is turned against you. It only takes one lucky shot from a monster to take you out, so the nifty little dodge mechanic is important, especially against stronger enemies. It's far from the most complicated combat out there, but regardless, it's still a fun addition to the dungeon sections. Helps keep it spicy. What I love the most about it is that if you are a high enough level above your enemies, you can wipe them out in the overworld without even needing a squad battle at all. I fucking love that because it allows for you to mow through a bunch of enemies quickly while still giving you experience and money and whatever, making any potential grind much easier. Going beyond that, you can also get special items that grant archetypes experience, and one of the easiest way to get them is with archetypes you've already maxed ranked. Instead of any experience gained while using a maxed out archetype disappearing into the ether, it instead goes towards earning some of those experience granting items. I hate grinding in any video game, especially now that I'm an adult with 2 kids, so naturally I am a big fan of any game that doesn't require hours of grinding away with the same 3 battles you've done 100 times already just to keep up with the increasing difficulty of the game. Metaphor manages to do just that, and I'm here for it. In general, I find the combat and gameplay of Metaphor to be a fantastic mix of some of the best elements from across their other series, including the calendar / time management / social link / follower / whatever you want to call it mechanic from the Persona games. Once again, it's very similar to what we've seen before, but with some interesting little twists that add some flavor. For one, the followers you develop bonds with have a much more direct connection to the archetypes. Each follower unlocks a new lineage of archetype, and developing that bond improves the lineage by unlocking additional inherited skill slots or stronger versions of that archetype. They are also way easier to complete thanks to just how much free time the game gives you. In every Persona game I've played, I haven't been able to max out all the social links in my first playthrough. It's technically possible, but you have to be as efficient as possible with your time, whereas Metaphor, that isn't really the case. I finished every follower and maxed my social stats in my first playthrough with time to spare. Metaphor is much more forgiving with its time, and I think a big part of that is how much time you spend in the Gauntlet Runner. You have to journey to dungeons and the different story locations, and while doing so you can work on your social stats and even build some of your bonds. It's pretty great and will allow more people to get a fuller experience out of the game's story in their first playthrough. Which is good, by the way. The story, I mean. I'm not usually one for traditional fantasy. Normally I find it too dull and I just can't get into it. It's far from my favorite genre, but I was still pretty stoked to see how Atlus would tackle a story in settings such as this. When Atlus's stories hit, they really hit, and it turns out they totally nailed that here. I really enjoyed the story of Metaphor. First of all, I think they did a fantastic job with world building. It's a fascinating world they've crafted here, full of awesome characters and a rich, fleshed out history. There's 10 different tribes which all manage to be distinct from not only each other, but regular boring old humans too. You can see the kingdom's rich history reflected in the environments and interactions with the members of the different tribes. Various settings of the game you're gallivanting about are a nice mix of traditional fantasy elements and Studio Zero's own unique spin on them. They also brought on some talented guest artists to help give the world of Metaphor a truly unique look. All of the different cities you discover are cool as hell and seem to play off of different fantasy tropes. The main city, Grand Trad, is a spiraling fantastical metropolis that feels massive in scale, and comparatively you have smaller, more intimate village settings that feel more classic. The kingdom of the game feels fully realized enough that I felt personally invested in not just the characters, but also the kingdom itself. In terms of actual story beats and twists and whatever, I don't necessarily think Metaphor breaks a lot of new ground. There are some twists I saw coming and some I didn't, but that honestly makes no difference to me. The story was interesting to me from the beginning to the end, and at no point did it feel dragged out or stagnant. The pacing of this game might be some of the best I've seen from Atlus. Much like with the Persona games, I think the strongest aspect of the story is the characters and how they evolve throughout the narrative, along with how you as the protagonist bond with them. And just like it's done well in those games, Studio Zero did a great job with that here. To top it all off, the story is bolstered by a protagonist that actually speaks. That's right, this protagonist is fully voiced. You do name him, and while I still would have preferred that he just be his own character entirely, I think this is a good step in the right direction. I'm a big fan of when the characters ask the protagonist a question, and instead of just vaguely waving his hand, he says the thing you clicked on him to say.
It tells of a world united as one tribe.
No discrimination, eh? A far cry from our world, then.
It goes a long way to make him feel like a participant in the story rather than just a blank stand-in for the player. Alright, so minor spoilers going forward. You may or may not even consider these to be spoilers, but I'm gonna throw this out there just in case. My biggest concern with the story of this game was just how the connection to our world would pay off. The more we learned about the game, the clearer it became that there was going to be some kind of tie-in between Metaphor and a version of the real world. I mean, a vision of our world is considered a fantasy within the world of Metaphor, and there's also the fact that there are literally big bad monsters called humans running about, so it's pretty obvious that the story wasn't going to be completely disconnected from reality. I was worried that whatever payoff the story provided for this connection would just end up ruining one of the main appeals of the game. I wanted to see Metaphor exist as its own fantasy world, and there was a part of me that was concerned that the title of the game would be a bit too literal. I really do think that if the big reveal for the game was that it was all some kind of actual metaphor, or some kind of it was all a dream garbage, it could have soured the whole experience, at least narratively. Thankfully, that ended up not being the case, and the reveal we do end up getting is way better. I'm not going to get into the specifics, but I reached the credits feeling satisfied with the way the world was left and how the story ended. I still sort of wish that Metaphor was completely its own thing, but I don't mind the way they made the connection work. Look, I really liked this game. I don't necessarily think it's going to redefine the RPG genre or anything like that, but I do think it's an impressive accumulation of so much of what makes Atlus games special. It's not perfect, but Metaphor manages to take inspiration from across the Atlus catalog and turn it into something that feels comfortably familiar and wholly distinct all at the same time. Plus, I get the vibe it was made to be more appealing to newcomers to the genre, and that approach definitely paid off because the game sold like 1 million copies in the first 24 hours, becoming the fastest selling Atlus game ever. Studio Zero put a lot of heart and work into this game, and it turned out amazing. I can't wait to see what they do next, whether it's a sequel to this or another brand new thing. Either way, I'm in. If you've played the Persona or SMT games before and enjoyed them, then you should definitely check this game out. You'd most definitely like it. It still retains a lot of DNA from those series. If you've never played any Atlus games before, then this is a great one to start with. You know what? Fuck it. I recommend this game to everyone. Everyone should play this, including you, Max. Anyway, if you are one of the many people who have played this game already, then let me know what you think of it in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, it'd be pretty cash money of you to leave a like, and maybe consider subscribing to the channel if you're into that kind of thing. I've been Tin from Tin Max. As always, thanks for watching, and I will see you in whatever we do next.